My name is Ariana. I was 24 when I returned home after my father's sudden passing, thinking I'd find shelter, maybe even healing. Instead, I became the maid in a house that used to be mine. My mother had remarried just months after my father's funeral. Her new husband, Charles, was smug, controlling, and had an 18-year-old son named Mason, who walked like the world owed him everything. They lived in my father's old house now. My father had built it himself brick by brick, a two-story farmhouse with blue shutters and creaky floors that held decades of memories. When I arrived, it no longer smelled like fresh bread or old books. It smelled like bleach and entitlement. At first, I tried to keep the peace. I cleaned up after dinner. I folded Mason's laundry. I even made coffee for Charles. I told myself it was temporary, just until I figured things out. But the requests became demands. Then the demands became rules. One evening, I was wiping down the kitchen counter when Mason strutted in, dropped his muddy sneakers in the hallway, and pointed toward the upstairs bathroom. "Toilet's clogged," he said flatly. "Go clean it." I turned confused. "Why don't you do it?" That's when my mother looked up from her wineglass and said the words that still echo in my bones. "He's the king," she said without blinking. "Clean his toilet." I froze. My jaw clenched. Mason smirked. I walked past him, but instead of going upstairs, I went to my room, locked the door, and cried for an hour. The next morning, things escalated. I refused to iron his school uniform. Charles pounded on my door. "Come out and do your job," he yelled. "I'm not your maid," I shouted back. Seconds later, the door burst open. Charles grabbed my arm and yanked me into the hallway. Mason stood at the end of the hall watching with a grin. "You think you can talk back?" Charles hissed. Then came the belt. The first hit landed across my upper back. I screamed. The second across my side. I begged him to stop. I looked at my mother. She just stood there. When I finally broke free, I stumbled to the kitchen, holding my arm tight to my chest. Something felt wrong, off angle, out of place. I grabbed my hoodie, checked my wallet empty except for a crumpled dollar bill. As I reached for my toothbrush, my mother slammed the drawer shut. "You want to act grown? Then leave." So I left. No shoes, a broken arm, $1 in my pocket. They never called. But what they didn't know was this. I wasn't just walking away. I was starting something that would terrify them. I didn't know where I was going that night. The Texas air was thick with summer heat, and my bare feet burned against the pavement. Every step sent a shock through my shoulder. I wrapped my hoodie tighter around myself, trying not to let the pain win. $1 and a broken arm, that's all I had. No keys, no phone, no one waiting for me. I made it to a gas station on the edge of town and stood under the harsh glow of a flickering street lamp. I must have looked pitiful, bloody, limping eyes hollow. The clerk inside wouldn't let me use the bathroom. "You have to buy something," he said without even looking up. I handed him my last dollar and pointed to the cheapest water bottle in the cooler. He shoved it across the counter like I was contagious. Outside, I sat on the curb behind the building, drinking slowly, cradling my arm. I could feel it swelling, bruising, stiffening. Every breath hurt. Every swallow reminded me I hadn't eaten all day. I pulled the hood over my head and tried to disappear. That night, I slept behind the library my father once took me to when I was little. It had a small courtyard tucked away from the road with a bench under an old oak tree. I curled up as best I could. My shoulder throbbed. The stars blinked like they were trying to decide whether to look away or watch. By morning, the pain was unbearable. I knew I needed help, so I went to the county hospital and waited 7 hours in the ER. When they finally saw me, the nurse's expression changed the moment she looked at my bruises. "Domestic violence?" she asked gently. I nodded, unable to speak. They patched me up, gave me a sling for my arm, and offered a shelter address. I took it, but I didn't go. Not yet. I wasn't ready to be surrounded by women whose stories probably echoed mine. I wasn't ready to be reminded that I'd let this happen for too long. So I wandered. I spent 2 days moving between the library, an abandoned bus stop, and a church that left its doors open after dark. I ate crackers someone left on a donation table and drank from water fountains. I washed up in gas station sinks and pretended I was just passing through. On the third night, I remembered something. A place my father once showed me long before he got sick. We'd driven past it on a Sunday drive, a broken-down storage building on a plot of land he bought with hopes of turning it into a studio for me one day. "You'll need this," he'd said, pressing a folded blueprint into my hand. "If life ever pushes too hard, push back here." Back then I thought he was being poetic, but now I was ready to push back. I walked 5 miles to the address. The place looked abandoned. The sign out front had faded to nothing. The gate was rusted shut, but I squeezed through. Inside the building smelled like dust-damp wood, and something old, but not dead. There was a cracked drafting table, a pile of wood samples, and a small generator in the back. This was it. This was the seed he planted for me. The next morning, I walked to a nearby hardware store and asked for any cleaning supplies they were going to throw out. One kind worker, a man named Mr. Harold, gave me a bucket of mismatched items, half-used bleached steel wool, some trash bags. "You sure you want this stuff?" he asked. I nodded. "I've got something to clean up." Over the next few days, I scrubbed the floors, patched the windows with cardboard, and made a makeshift bed out of foam from an old sofa. I slept in a corner under the skylight where the sun poured in every morning. For the first time in years, I woke up without someone yelling my name. I wasn't safe, not yet. But I was alone. And for once, that felt like a kind of freedom. I found an old sketch pad among my father's things buried under dust and rolled up architectural plans. His handwriting on the cover read, "For Ariana's future studio." My hands trembled when I saw it. That night I sat at the drafting table and began sketching, not people, not pain, but spaces. Spaces where I could breathe. Spaces where no one could order me to scrub a toilet. It was the first page in a story they would never write for me again. I didn't know how yet, but I would rebuild something, and they would regret the day they ever told me to serve. It was on my 6th morning in the studio that I first saw Mr. Harold again. He appeared like part of the landscape gray ball cap worn flannel shirt, hands coated in dry paint and sawdust. He was carrying a wooden crate filled with scrap wood and some old hinges. "Thought you might be needing a proper door that closes," he said, nodding toward the gaping frame at the front of the building. I didn't know how to answer. I think I just stared for a second too long. "I used to know your dad," he added. "He talked about this place like it was the Ark of the Covenant. Said you were going to design skyscrapers one day." I felt my throat tighten. I whispered, "I still am. I think." He set the crate down gently. He left a map of the property with me, said to give it to you if you ever came back. Said you'd know what to do with it. That afternoon, Mr. Harold helped me hang the door. He worked slow, precise humming old gospel tunes under his breath. When we finished, he handed me the rolled-up map. It was bigger than I expected, hand-drawn in my father's style, with measurements, notes, and even a faint sketch of a 2-room studio space labeled Ariana's drafting corner and reading nook for Dad. I pressed my fingers to the paper and didn't realize I was crying until Mr. Harold handed me a cloth. "Build it," he said softly, "even if no one believes you can." The following days bled together in a rhythm I didn't know I'd needed. Wake early, wash at the gas station, sketch, clean, build, repeat. I made a small workspace out of pallets and sawhorses. I found an old folding chair by a dumpster, repainted it navy blue. With every improvement, no matter how small, the studio started to feel more like a home carved out of grit than a shelter of shame. At night, I'd sit under the one working light and scroll through online architecture forums on a borrowed tablet Mr. Harold had lent me. I created a profile under the name Studio Phoenix and started uploading samples of my old college projects, digital renderings, and hand-drawn redesigns of small spaces, laundry rooms, turned into offices, attics, turned into guest lofts. To my surprise, people noticed. I got a message one night from a woman in Kansas. "I love your eye for cozy spaces. Can you redesign my sunroom?" I said yes. Then another client came, and another. I wasn't making a fortune, but it was enough to buy a proper mattress, a secondhand laptop, and real coffee. For the first time in months, I felt control returning to my fingertips. Every time I worked on a plan, I remembered what Charles used to say. "You're just a dreamer, Ariana." All that fancy design talk means nothing in the real world. But he was wrong, because this was the real world. And I was reshaping it. Mr. Harold came by every few days with supplies, old hinges, nails, even a used toaster. He never asked what happened at home. He just kept saying, "You're doing it, girl, quietly. That's the best kind." One afternoon, he showed up with a tin box. Inside were a few dusty letters from my father. He'd written them before he passed, but never sent them. One read simply, "I believe in how you see the world. Ari, you turn broken spaces into sanctuaries. Start with this one." That night, I started sketching the full layout of the studio reception area, working space small display gallery for my favorite designs. I didn't just want to live here anymore. I wanted this place to breathe. So I named it the Blueprint Room. And above the front entrance, I carved the words into reclaimed wood. A few neighbors began stopping by curious. Some dropped off things I might need: paint samples, empty frames, magazines with design tips. One woman left a small potted fern with a note that said, "Every home starts with something alive." I placed it near the window. Day by day, the girl they threw out with $1 was becoming someone impossible to ignore. And I wasn't even close to done yet. It started with one invitation. A local home improvement store saw my sketches online and offered to host a weekend event featuring local designers and craftspeople. "Showcase your process," they said. "People love the underdog stories." I hesitated. I wasn't ready to be seen, not really. But then I remembered something my father wrote in one of his letters. "If they won't give you a seat at the table, design a better table." So I said yes. For 2 weeks, I worked nonstop. I reorganized the studio, took photos of every redesign I'd completed, and printed off flyers. I designed a signature piece, an open space kitchen layout that maximized light and minimized cost. I titled it, "Light Finds a Way." When the showcase day came, I stood behind a folding table with a corkboard of pinned sketches, paint swatches, and before and after prints. A few people stopped to look, then more. Some nodded thoughtfully. One woman asked, "You do this all yourself?" I nodded. She smiled. "You've got a gift." By the end of the day, I'd booked 5 consultations and collected a list of potential collaborators. A man with a publishing startup asked if I'd write a short piece for his design newsletter. Another offered to connect me with a nonprofit that renovates shelters. I was still gathering up my things when I felt a strange stillness settle over the space, like a shadow had walked in. I turned slowly, and there they were, my mother and Mason. She wore a navy blue dress, hair pulled tight into a bun, and walked like she was late for church. Mason trailed behind her, bulkier, now cleaner. He wore a tucked-in shirt and a smug expression like nothing had ever gone wrong. "Ariana," she said brightly. "There you are." I froze. She opened her arms slightly like this was a reunion, like she hadn't slammed a drawer shut on my hand when I asked for my toothbrush. "We've been hearing about your little business," she said. "Saw you on the flyer. Your stepfather sends his best." I didn't speak. Mason stepped forward, scanning my table. "Didn't think you had it in you," he said with a smirk. "What's all this Pinterest for poor people?" Still, I said nothing. Mom reached for one of the flyers on the table. "Your father would have been so proud," she said, her voice syrupy. "We're just happy you found your way." That's when I saw it. They weren't here for me. They were here for the story, for the glow of my rising. They'd seen my name in places they didn't expect and came to remind me of their claim. I took a breath, stepped forward, and gently pulled the flyer from her hands. "You threw me out," I said quietly, "with a broken arm and $1. You told me to leave and never come back." Her smile faltered for the first time. Mason rolled his eyes. "God, are you still on about that? You were being dramatic, always are." I turned to the growing crowd behind them. Visitors and designers still watching. "This is my mother and stepbrother," I said clearly. "The ones who told me he's the king, clean his toilet." The words landed like a slap in the quiet space. Someone near the back gasped. Mom's smile curdled. "Ariana, don't make a scene." I leaned in low and calm. "This is the scene. You made it when you used your hands to break mine. and then I pointed behind me to a framed sketch on an easel. It was the interior blueprint of a bathroom. Not any bathroom, but the bathroom. The tile I scrubbed the sink Mason used to spit in the cracked mirror above the toilet. I had drawn it with jagged lines, dark angles, and one sentence etched across the wall in fine pencil. This is where I stopped being silent. The piece was titled "The Blueprint of Obedience." A reporter nearby scribbled furiously. A man with a camera took a step closer. Mom grabbed Mason's arm. "We should go." But I wasn't done. I stepped behind my table and reached for the mic the event coordinator had left for us to give closing thoughts. My voice didn't shake. I came here with nothing. No degree, no support, just an abandoned studio and a broken shoulder. But I rebuilt something they couldn't tear down. A voice, a space, a life. I locked eyes with my mother. "You didn't break me. You just gave me blueprints." The applause started slow, like disbelief had to wear off first. Then it grew. Not loud, but solid. Mason muttered something under his breath as he turned, pulling Mom away through the crowd. One woman whispered, "Is that really them?" Another said, "Unbelievable." The nerve. They left without another word. But their exit wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the email I received 3 days later from a small interior design magazine in Austin. They wanted to do a feature. "You've built more than spaces," the editor wrote. "You've built a story worth remembering." I said yes. Then I framed that sketch, the one of the bathroom, and underneath it I added a plaque designed by Ariana Blake, "Built from pain, lived in strength." 'Cause this time the house was mine, every single inch of it. The magazine feature came out 2 weeks later. From Broken to Blueprint: How One Woman Designed Her Way Out of Silence. They used a photo of me standing in the doorway of the studio sunlight, hitting the back wall where my first piece hung, "The Blueprint of Obedience." I wasn't smiling in the photo. I didn't have to. The image said enough. The article went viral in a way I hadn't expected. Not the flashy kind of viral, but the quiet, steady kind that shows up in inboxes and group chats and whispers. "You should read this." Within a few days, my inbox overflowed. Messages from other women, other daughters. I was kicked out at 17. My mom said the same thing. "He's the king. Serve him." I thought it was just me. I started writing back one by one. It took time, but each reply felt like laying a brick in something bigger, stronger. Then one morning my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but I did. A woman's voice came through, tight and deliberate. "Ariana Blake. Yes, this is Claire Drummond from the Women's History Center. We're curating an exhibit on creative responses to family trauma. Your stories come across our desks more than once." I said nothing. My heart had stopped somewhere between her name and the word exhibit. "We'd like to feature your work. The sketch is your gallery space, maybe even invite you to speak." I heard my own breath in the receiver. I'm honored I managed, but deep down I knew what this meant. They were going to see me. Not just as an underdog who survived, but as a woman who named what tried to kill her. And so would my family. The exhibit opened 3 months later. I'd spent weeks preparing. I chose 5 pieces to display, each one tied to a chapter they tried to erase. My father's original sketches, my first rendering after the night they beat me, the layout of the studio. And in the center, the reclaimed room. A 3-dimensional model of a bathroom, redesigned into a sanctuary titled "Only He Doesn't Live Here Anymore." Opening night was surreal. Guests moved slowly through the space, eyes wide, hands clasped. Some cried, some whispered, but everyone seemed to feel it. The heaviness turned into lines and corners and design. Then I saw them. I knew they'd come eventually. Mom in her pressed coat and perfect hair. Mason beside her, quiet for once. They entered like ghosts who didn't know they'd died. I kept my eyes forward. After the walkthrough, a small group gathered for my talk. I stood beneath a soft light holding the note cards I'd rewritten 3 dozen times. I didn't use them. I was raised in a house that taught me to serve. I began. But not in the way service is meant to be, a gift freely given. No. I was told my role was silence. Submission. I was told to clean the toilet for a boy who never worked a day in his life. And when I said no, they broke my arm. I paused. The room didn't move. My own mother told me he was the king, and I believed her until the day I left, with $1 and the clothes on my back. I looked up, and what came next left them terrified. I saw my mother flinch. I built a life from that silence. I designed a home from what they tried to destroy. Every corner of my studio is a rebuttal. Every sketch a refusal. Every wall I raised said one thing louder than any scream: I will not disappear. Applause rose like a tide, slow, relentless. I stepped down. I didn't look for them. I didn't need to. But as the crowd dispersed, a woman approached me. Mid-50s, silver earrings, gentle hands. "I know your mother," she said. "She told us you'd run off, said you had a breakdown. We believed her." I met her eyes. "You don't have to anymore." She nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." A few minutes later, my mother appeared beside me. She didn't say anything at first. Finally, she spoke. "You've made quite a name for yourself." I nodded. "I made it without you. You've always had a flair for drama." "Truth isn't drama." She took a breath, shifted her purse. "We all said things we regret." "No, you said things I replied." I screamed. "You left the room. You don't have to keep punishing me. This isn't punishment. This is remembering. And I won't forget just because it makes you uncomfortable." Mason walked over, scowling. "You're really gonna drag this out forever, huh?" I turned to him. "You dragged a belt across my back." He looked away. I took one step closer. "You don't scare me anymore. Neither of you do. I don't want your apology. I want your absence." They stood there, small beneath the lights. I turned and walked away. I had a keynote to prepare, and a life to keep building. A month after the exhibit, I moved into a new apartment. It wasn't big, just a one-bedroom above an old law office, but it had wide windows, oak floors, and a tiny balcony that caught the morning sun. I furnished it with pieces I'd built myself: tables made from reclaimed doors, a bookshelf lined with my father's tools, and a lamp I welded from a rusted pipe I found near the studio. In the living room, there was one wall I kept bare for a while. I didn't know what it was waiting for until one afternoon I found it. I'd been organizing my materials when I came across a half-finished sculpture I'd started back in the early studio days. A simple piece of clay shaped into a wing cracked and collapsed, the edges uneven. I almost threw it away once. Now I saw something different. That evening, I smoothed the lines, repaired the cracks with gold-colored adhesive, and etched 2 words into the underside: "Still here." I placed it on a floating shelf mounted at eye level and lit a candle beside it. The flame flickered against the curves of the wing, casting soft shadows on the wall. That space felt whole after that. Not perfect, but whole. Every day I woke up and brewed coffee, watered the tiny fern I'd kept alive since the studio, answered emails from clients, some who'd found me through the article, others through quiet word of mouth. I redesigned kitchens, attics, and once a single bookshelf in a retiree's mobile home that became her favorite corner in the world. I wasn't rich, but I had a waiting list. People trusted me to shape their spaces because they knew I understood what it meant to live in something broken and still want beauty. Some nights I returned to the studio to work late, just me and the sound of the wheel turning, the smell of damp clay, the low hum of healing. I began sculpting new figures, women with missing parts, wings that didn't match feet that seemed rooted into cracked earth. But they stood. They always stood. One sculpture became a centerpiece. A girl seated cross-legged, her arms folded across her chest, like wings, her head tilted slightly toward the sky. I named her "She Who Refused to Serve." At the next community gallery night, I placed her in the front window. No label, no plaque, just her. People stopped, stared. Some wept. One woman walked in, held my hand, and whispered, "That was me." I understood. One day I received a cream-colored envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name written in tight handwriting I knew too well. Inside, a folded letter from my mother. It read, "Ariana, we were raised hard. I raised you harder, maybe too hard. I don't expect anything. Call if you want. Mom, P.S. I'm sorry." No mention of Mason, no mention of the belt, no ownership, just fragments. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it on the shelf beside the sculpture. Not to forgive, not to forget, but to remember what I overcame. That evening, Evelyn stopped by the studio with a thermos of tea and 2 slices of peach cobbler from the diner down the street. She tossed her coat over the stool and sat beside me. "You look settled," she said. "I'm learning what peace feels like," I replied. "Feels weird, doesn't it?" "A little." She poured the tea. We sat for a long time, listening to the wind shift through the old windows. Finally, she asked, "You ever going to call her?" I looked out the window. A child across the street was drawing something on the sidewalk with chalk. A house maybe a sun. "Maybe one day," I said. "But not today." She nodded. "That's fair." That night I lit a candle in the ceramic holder I'd made years ago, the one with a slight chip in the base, the glaze uneven but soft. I pressed a thumb-sized piece of raw clay into my palm, held it over the flame for a few seconds, then set it down beside the sculpture. Some fires destroy, others forge. Mine had done both. I wasn't rebuilding from ashes anymore. I was creating something no one could burn. Some houses fall apart quietly. They don't collapse all at once. They creak over time. One slammed door, one insult brushed off, one bruise hidden. And then one day you realize you were never safe inside it. I didn't leave because I was brave. I left because staying would have meant erasing myself piece by piece. And the truth is, many women don't leave because no one ever taught us that we're allowed to, that daughters can outgrow mothers, that silence is not loyalty, that survival is not selfishness. I used to believe that pain made me permanent in their world. If I just endured long enough, if I folded my needs small enough, maybe they'd love me better. But pain doesn't buy belonging. It only teaches you how to disappear with a polite face. To the women watching this, the ones who were told to lower their voice, to clean up the messes of men, who never learned to pick up after themselves, the ones who were told they were dramatic, difficult too much. You are not too much. They were simply too little to love fully, too little to admit wrong, too little to face a daughter who grew stronger than their control. If you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s, and you still feel the echoes of being unseen, I want to tell you something no one told me soon enough. It's not too late. Not too late to rewrite the story. Not too late to stop waiting for an apology that will never come. Not too late to build something quietly, steadily that belongs entirely to you. Maybe it's not a studio. Maybe it's a garden. Maybe it's a poem tucked into a drawer. Maybe it's a morning cup of tea sipped slowly in a house no one can yell in. Maybe it's just saying no, that was wrong, and meaning it. You don't have to sculpt your truth from clay. You just have to stop sanding down your soul for people who never held you gently. Let them call you dramatic. Let them say you're rewriting history. You're not. You're remembering it clearly for the first time. And if they try to say it never happened, look them in the eyes and say, "But I'm still here." That's proof enough.